Business Weekly brought to you by National Social Security Fund. NSSF, we secure your future.
On this week's edition of KTN Business Weekly, we focus on plans to switch off counterfeit mobile phones from the Kenyan mobile phone market. Remember that you can send in your questions, comments, observations to 8041 or KTN BizWeekly at standardmedia.co.ke. Good evening and welcome to this edition of KTN Business Weekly. I'm Michael Oye. The 30th of September, that's the date when a new dawn will be ushered in for Kenya's fast-growing mobile telephone network industry. Now, in one go, the Communications Commission of Kenya, together with mobile phone operators, will switch off to all networks mobile phones classified as counterfeit. Tonight, we look into the process of clearing all these so-called unworthy phones, and we ask whether it's a benefit or punitive to consumers.
The 30th of September is a date that has elicited a lot of reactions, both positive and negative, among members of the public. It is on this date that the Communications Commission of Kenya plans to switch off all counterfeit mobile phones being used in the country in a bid to curb rising cases of terrorist threats in the country.
If a counterfeit product is a counterfeit product, it means that you have taken somebody's name and used it. It's like somebody using your name. They are counterfeit in terms of name.
Counterfeit phones are being used, it's difficult to track them when they're being used by criminals. And in that particular case, we wanted to ensure that the security of our networks is guaranteed.
The communications regulator holds that the counterfeit gadgets are not easy to track when used in criminal acts, thus making it difficult for law enforcement agencies to carry out investigations.
Mobile phones, they fall under what we call our pre-shipment verification of conformity to standards program because they have a health and safety aspect. So they need to be tested, inspected, verified that they conform to the standards before they come into the country. So we have partners all over the world that when you want to import anything that is in that list, you have to go to the partner to inspect it, and then you will be given a certificate of conformity, and then with that certificate of conformity, you can bring the product into the country.
And while the fight against terror and the subsequent elimination of counterfeit phones in the market is welcome, especially by the industry players, it is CCK's method of execution that has drawn sharp criticism from consumer protection bodies and the general public.
Anybody who's been to any school of criminology will tell you, crime is so dynamic. I don't know why anybody within Kenya Police, for example, or CCK, whoever has done research to believe that the highest number of terrorism activities are actually arranged or executed by phone, and that phone is supposedly counterfeit. I don't know who told anybody that. So we see some sort of a poorly coordinated strategy here that is going to be punitive to consumers.
Counterfeit products in the local market come in all shapes and forms, a situation that is likely to worsen war against counterfeits even further.
Counterfeit needs a lot of intelligence because they can come through the normal route. You see, if, like as I said, if this pen with its product name, comes through the Mombasa route and it has been inspected, it will have it will be conformed to the standard. So it will easily get into the market. So those which are not substandard will easily come into the market. So usually it requires a lot of intelligence where both the company and the people dealing with it, like KEBS, the anti-counterfeit agency, work together through intelligence to know how to stop this.
Regulation 24 of the Kenya Information and Communications on Importation, Type Approval and Distribution of Communication Equipment, Regulations of 2010, requires all mobile phones to be type approved. Contravention of this statute attracts a fine of not exceeding 300,000 or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years or both, states the CCK.
I do not even think that the Kenya Bureau of Standards has any specific standardization, apart from very general ones, on the phones that we use in this country. So we will define counterfeiting in terms of the Kenyan standards. Has any phone, for example, that doesn't work in Kenya is a counterfeit. But manufacturers have a different definition of counterfeits. Is anything that is in their name, but is not theirs.
The standards that are developed, the national standards that are developed to the ICT equipment that are supposed to be operated in this country are actually developed and approved by KEBS. We also are a member of the team in KEBS that develop these standards. So when the standards are developed by KEBS, like the ICT standards, are the ones we adopt and enforce as a sector regulator. KEBS deals with quite a variety of goods and products which they have to develop standards for. So in this particular case, when we are voicing about the standards that we have set for the mobile phones in this country, we are actually also talking on behalf of KEBS.
As consumers, we're just at the end of the stream. We're not too sure who manufactured. If we see a name called Nokia, for example, we are not too sure whether that's Nokia from Finland or Nokia from any other country or Nokia from River Road, Nairobi. So basically, it's a very ambiguous definition of counterfeits.
Consumer bodies argue that switching off of counterfeit phones already in the market will hurt the economy, as there are no plans of refunding customers, and view it as a case of regulator going for the lowest hanging fruits.
If people are consulting, if people are running a lot of campaigns saying there's a magic date on September 30th, for example, when they're supposed to disconnect all the phones, question you should be asking, at what expense?
We just came with one simple solution. Because instead of wasting resources trying to police the pirates or even with the speedboats at the port of Mombasa to see that these have entered through another entry somewhere there, we have just said, yes, please bring them in. But since they are not authorized, you are not going to sell them, because we are empowering the consumer to know that this is right, this is not right. So at the end of it, what do you expect? These guys are not going to bring in counterfeit phones anymore because they don't have a market here.
Time for a break now, but when we return, we'll look at the possible solutions and the benefits that lie in the switching off of counterfeit phones from the Kenyan mobile market. Stay with KTN Business Weekly.
The logic of switching off of counterfeit phones already in the market by the regulator, instead of preventing their entry into the country in the first place, is a question that has exposed the government's underbelly, as perhaps admitting that the porous nature of our borders is beyond its control.
Kenya is a country with many porous routes. There are also a lot of porous routes that the things have been coming through. And one of them, I've been told recently, I won't confirm, but I know it's through the Somali route. We were also getting a lot of counterfeit products, which I think now have gone down. So they can come out through any, we have border with Tanzania, we have border with Uganda, we have the coastal line, we have border with Somalia, we have border with Ethiopia, we have border with Sudan. Now you can imagine that if around us we are not doing the same thing, those things can easily come through the porous borders.
Nobody is telling us that even if they disconnected all the phones on that particular day, they'll stop our porous borders, in terms of allowing the so-called counterfeit phones to come in. And nobody has told us there are a few people who have been importing these phones, because certainly they're not consumers, who have been importing this phone to the country. Nobody's telling us whether they've been arrested. Nobody's telling the poor consumer about what is called a counterfeit phones. Instead, they're actually becoming so technical. They're telling people about IMEI in this country. Possibly, less than 5% of the consumers, particularly in the rural areas, know what they are talking about.
One of the things that you may need to know is that this is a highly technical area where even the gadgets that are coming in, it might be very difficult to get specialists, experts who are able to identify what kind of goods that are coming in to be able to cap that. However, when we started realizing it, we brought all these people together. We brought the Counterfeit Authority, we brought KRA, we brought the police, we brought in now the mobile service providers themselves, we brought in the equipment vendors themselves, and then we even brought the consumer organizations on board. And we told them, look, this is a problem, and we must stop it.
I think the territorial integrity of this country is not the responsibility of the consumer. So there are agencies in government whom we believe are very, very competent, but they are sleeping on the job. And now they want the poor consumer, to pay for their lack of rising to the occasion.
And while there is no official data regarding the total number of counterfeit phones in the Kenyan market, in 2011, the figure was estimated to stand at 2.4 million. Going by this figure, switching off of counterfeit phones may result in about 3 to 5% loss in revenue to mobile service providers across the board, while the regulator to make good is warning of switching off the counterfeit gadgets.
I believe Kenyans should just understand that, whatever we do, there will always be a small cost. What we're trying to do is to minimize the cost as much as possible. What we have tried to avoid is just to tell people, please, we are going to switch off your counterfeit phones without somebody knowing whether his phone or not is counterfeit, and how he can be able to identify that this phone is counterfeit.
Why should you use, for example, 10 shillings to save 1 shilling? And that's purely what the campaign is all about. Nobody is telling us that even if they disconnected all the phones on that particular day, they'll stop our porous borders, in terms of allowing the so-called counterfeit phones to come in. And nobody has told us there are a few people who have been importing these phones, because certainly they're not consumers.
How do you get an iPad for, I'll exaggerate a bit, but how do you get an iPad for 10,000 and somebody else got it for 20 and it's the same, and you're flossing and saying, mine was cheaper? You pay for the cheap at one point. You see, there are some things which you do painfully sometimes so that you save the country at the end of the day. Because it's not just about your 10,000 shillings, whatever, it's a whole lot of an economy destabilized because of that market which is there. So to me, I think it's the best thing. Lock people out. Then, once you lock people out, people will be careful. And even the ones who are selling the phone, you will go to, before you buy a phone, you will actually, and a lot of people I think have already checked their phones. You will go to CCK and say, please tell me if this phone is fake or not. And then you say, I can't buy it, it's fake.
And while the regulator is caught up in a situation of robbing Peter to pay Paul, the situation is not any different in the wider African market, and it's only a matter of time before it knocks at their doors. However, there are present challenges that need to be looked into. For instance, the country lacks a mobile lab, and thus products into the country are not tested and merely subjected to random sampling, a test that unscrupulous dealers effortlessly dodge.
It's one thing to say that it will be tested there. Not everything can be tested, and you go and do your check, then you inspect. In that inspection, mobile phones is a small thing. 2, 3, you cannot test, you're not going to test everything, if you see what I mean. It's not cost effective, it's not possible. You must trust what, the batch.
For now though, Kenyans have to wait for the day of reckoning slotted for the 30th of September, as the regulator hopes that finally this bitter pill will cure the country from the cancer of counterfeit products.
In the money markets, the Kenya shilling is taking a hit from importers' end-month obligations. The shilling was quoted at an average of 84.26, while to the sterling pound, it traded at a mean of 130.82. Against the euro, the home unit is exchanging at 102.13, while to the South African rand, the shilling continues to weaken, trading at 0.999. That's all on this week's edition of KTN Business Weekly. Thank you very much for watching. Let's do it again next week. Remember that you can send in your comments or questions to the email address ktnbizweekly@standardmedia.co.ke or text it to 8041. From myself and the entire KTN Business Weekly team, thank you for watching. I'm Michael Oyer. I'll be back on KTN Prime shortly.
Business Weekly brought to you by National Social Security Fund. NSSF, we secure your future.